Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining this webinar. I see a few familiar names there in the participant list and many others who I have yet to meet, but I look forward to connecting with all of you today. As I go through the presentation, we will have a Q&A. If you have any questions along the way, I'm good with answering them in the chat as much as I can keep up with it. So feel free to put things there, and I will ask you some questions too. And as I ask them, please, give me some answers. I'd love to interact with you along the way, as well as having our Q&A at the end. I'll give you a little overview about what I'll talk about quickly today. In this webinar, first I'm going to talk about the social media mindset, and this ties into how we do professional development with network knowledge activities. I want to be really clear that when I say social media, though, I'm not just talking about what immediately comes to mind for most people, which is Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat. Those, of course, are included in social media, but there is a much broader definition that can be used. Really, any media that brings us all together socially, most of it which happens to be on the internet these days and coming to us through our mobile devices. Then we'll talk a little bit about online wealth building, not some sort of Ponzi scheme that I'm trying to sell you all into, but rather an activity that a lot of people are engaged in with knowledge. And then I'll introduce the network knowledge activity framework, which helps you be really purposeful in this activity. And then finally, I'll give a few pointers for successful and ethical knowledge networking. These network knowledge activities, the framework that I'm going to share with you today, works well for professional development, but also bringing it down into our classrooms. And a point that I like to make whenever I go out and talk to people is that we need to think in our classrooms and in our more formal learning experiences about what we're preparing people to do in the future. And that's not just to go on to the next class, but it's really to function in life, whether that's on the job or meeting their other everyday knowledge needs. And where do people go these days when they have a question? Are you thinking Google? Because that is where a lot of us go when we have a question. We go online, we type something in, and we hope that we're going to get a good answer. So take a moment and check for yourselves. What do you currently do online, socially, educationally, professionally? What tools do you spend the most time on? What do you think about when you're using the internet and social media? As I move along to the next few slides, go ahead and type into me anything that comes to mind for you. What do you associate with being online and using social media? The mindset has really changed a lot for as long as I've been in this game. So 20 years ago, I was teaching online. And teaching online looked really different from how it looks today. We didn't have a, full-featured learning management system the way that we do today. The rest of the internet was not nearly what it is today. There was a lot of plain text on a page. There was relatively little interacting with other people at that time, but things have really changed. So if we go back 20 years, we've got this producer and consumer mindset with the internet, where we've got one set of people, and it was a relatively small group of people who are creating web pages. And I was teaching a lot of people to create web pages in those days. And then we have our consumers who are viewing their web pages, just taking in all of the knowledge. In the classroom, we've got instructors who are lecturing, and students have their job that's there to listen. Now, what I see you all typing in here to me is that you're doing things socially, you're using Facebook to check in with friends and family, you're connecting with various people on LinkedIn. That's a more professional space for a lot of people. You might be using Twitter. So many different options for what people are doing. So we flash forward to now, and we're all somewhat being consumers, and we're all somewhat being producers, or ideally we're doing that. Here's a more structured way to think about what you're doing online. What are you doing in those moments when you consume? So it's things like attending a webinar, searching for information, saving it, just following people, a lot of lurking. And lurking has some negative connotations, but it's not a negative thing. There's a lot to be gained from lurking. But if all we do is lurk and we're not participating actively in this larger knowledge economy, then everything's going to stagnate. We're allowing a few voices, a few pieces of expertise to come through. And there are a lot of people who have things to share. Sometimes people say, well, what about the people who are wrong? Well, that's an opportunity for us to negotiate knowledge, and often those conversations lead us to a much better place. So it's important that we're all engaged at least somewhat in producing. And so, things like giving a webinar today is an act of production for me. Although I may have been consuming a lot in the last few days and not really producing, today's my day to produce a little bit. Anything where you're sharing what other people have created that you found, posting your own things. When you complete something, do you just finish it and sit back satisfied and say, I'm going to give this to my group of learners? Or do you say, and I'm going to give it to my instructional designer network, or I'm going to give it to this larger group of people who I don't even know yet, but who might be in my network someday? That's something to think about. When you consume, and you have a positive experience, do you reach out to other people? Do you reach out to other people who have consumed the same items because you have like interests? Do you reach out to the people who posted that thing to share it with you so that you can comment on it or discuss it with them, or even just to like it, to tell them, hey, I was here and I used this thing? That kind of an acknowledgement goes a long way to encourage the people who are producers to keep producing. It is a form of production in and of itself. It's leaving a mark. It's a very small and comfortable one for a lot of people to engage in, but nonetheless important. So that brings me to this idea of online wealth building. And I love bringing in the phrase of you have to spend money to make money. In this knowledge economy, I would alter that a little bit to say you've got to be active in the process in order to really make something of all of this knowledge, to really be participating in it. There's so much that is there for us online, and it's useful to me to break it down into three big chunks, three areas where we can start to focus our online wealth building. One is the tools. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about tools today, at least not in the formal part of the presentation, but I'm happy to talk tools when we do Q&A. And, I see that somebody's using Digo. That's a really great social bookmarking tool. There's so many tools we can choose and use. Too many of them, and it can be a bit overwhelming for people. It's either just too much to check on a regular basis, or you can't remember all of your logins. Tools that do things that you don't really need, so you just stop using them for a while. And that's fine. But knowing the array of tools that you can use and the purposes of those tools can be a very powerful part of your online knowledge wealth. And then, of course, there's the world of information. I see we've got a question about what social bookmarking is. I'm going to come to that in just a moment. I see somebody's answering it for you already, and that's great. But we will come back to that in just a moment as well. So information, there's so much out there. Some of it's accurate, some of it's inaccurate. We need to work through it. But we find our good information sources and we tend to go back to them time and again. And then there are humans. There are people out there. People who are knowledge leaders who we want to connect to. People who are influencers who we want to connect to. People who are our immediate peers, who we think that we can share things with and they'll share with us, whose work we can review for them and they'll review for us, who have like experiences to us, and they can be really valuable parts of our knowledge networks as well. So we have these tools, this information, these humans. We have a wealth of things that we can find out there. What are you going to do with it? This is a problem for a lot of people. We go online and we find all of this stuff, and then it's just there as stuff. And sometimes we can effectively tap into a part of it, or it solves an immediate need. But then when we walk away from it, it's kind of a disorganized mess, and we don't have a very clear purpose for it. And this is where I bring in the network knowledge activity framework. I'm going to talk through each of these separately. This is just a screen to give you an overview of them. But there's a certain mindfulness that's associated with having a purpose or a plan when you are going online and you're using tools to access both information and humans and to try to have these meaningful learning interactions. I think this is something that we all understand well in the context of being instructional designers, right? You're going to start with your objectives, aren't you? You know what you want to do. But do we start with our objectives in mind when we go online for our own professional development? Do we even know what they are? I think sometimes we have very targeted, small situational objectives, and so we get online and we try to find the answer to our question, find the resource that we're looking for. But other times we may allow our online world to fall dormant because we're not quite sure what we're doing with it. Or we may have spent a lot of time poking around one day and then we feel like we've fallen down the rabbit hole. We've seen a lot of interesting stuff, but so what? What do you do with this? And as I go through these activities, hopefully what I'll be talking about will tap into some of these ideas for you. I use the same framework when I'm talking to people about ways that they might be integrating the internet and social media into their classrooms to get students actively involved in the process. So we can think about all of these activities in both of those ways. And the first one is collecting. So I want some of you to confess to me. Every time I go talk to a group of people, there's at least one person, but usually more than that, who is a chronic bookmarker. Do I have any chronic bookmarkers? If I do, go ahead and give your confession in the chat. Are you somebody who goes around and finds a lot of things online? You're like, well, that's fascinating, and this is great too, and you save it, you save it, you save it. You have a lot of stuff. That's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, and it's a first step to a lot of the other network knowledge activities. But can you find the things that you want later on? Can you get back and return to them? Or is that sometimes too much trouble because you've got to wade through this whole mess? Yeah, it's challenging. You remember, like, I saw something a month ago, 2 months ago, it was really great. So collecting, I like to say, is that first step. But when we just sit as being collectors, we're actually being pretty passive. We're consumers, and we need to find a way to be more purposeful in our collecting. And I see we've got some suggestions in here in the chat that are great, some different ways that people are organizing or that they don't organize, and help. What do you do? That's where the next activity comes in, and that would be to curate. And what I always think of with curating is a museum or an archive or some other place that has a very deliberate and ordered collection of things. So you have to go out and collect first, but then you have to figure out how you're going to organize things together. In an online setting, we can tag things, we can annotate them. The annotations can be descriptive annotations of what is found there, or it could even be a descriptive note about why you chose to save this thing, or what project or what class it happens to be for. This taps into social bookmarking also. So we had the question about that before. There are social bookmarking tools that you can use. It's the act of bookmarking, but with other people. That's what makes it social. So you can have a group of people with a mutual interest, and you're all saving and tagging and annotating or commenting on items to a common place. The use of tags can be really wonderful and meaningful because it will help you sort through that pile quickly later on. A tool that I use frequently is the one that's called Diigo. That's Diigo. And I find things for my own teaching year-round, but there may be a class that I only teach in the fall. So when I am finding something in January for that class, I will tag it with that class name as the tag, and I'll leave myself a note about why I wanted to use it for that class later on. So when August comes around and I'm planning for that fall class again, I will go into my Diigo account and I will choose the tag for that class, and suddenly all of the resources I found for the last year are right there. They're a curated collection, and I have notes to myself about why I saved these things, and I can make a decision then about whether or not to integrate them into the class. I find that to be very purposefully meaningful. You also might winnow down a collection at that point in time and decide that perhaps the 50 items that I very enthusiastically saved initially are too many. So I'm going to get rid of some of the ones that weren't great, or some of the ones that were derivative or duplicated others, and have a much more manageable, meaningful collection. So that when somebody says, do you have any resources on this topic? I'm not throwing everything in the world at them, but rather saying, yes, these are the best ones that I have. This is also a great activity to have students do, because we know that they're not always critical users of online information. But you can set them forth to go collect and then have them curate what they have collected. So they have to look through it and determine what's really good or not so good, as the case may be. So then there's sharing. A lot of our tools have integrated share buttons in there. Do we have any big sharers in the crowd today? People who just like to share everything that they find because they hope that other people might find it useful. I find that some of the folks who are big-time collectors are also big-time sharers. They're always looking out for other people who are in their network. And they think, if I found something that is useful, other people might find it useful as well. So sharing is one of those activities, and many of us could become more purposeful about it. So it might be, there are optimal ways to share, basically. Some of us don't share often enough, and so we might think about when and how we'll share. And if we want to share in a polished way, we could curate a very nice collection for people and choose to share that rather than just hitting, share, and endlessly putting out a stream of items. And I think that's why a lot of people don't share, is they think, oh, I don't want to make too much noise out there. And some people are making a lot of noise out there, and there is that happy middle ground for sharing. Sharing is a really positive thing, though. Branching off of sharing, I'm going to move on to the idea of brokering, which is taking something from one group of people and deliberately bringing it to another group of people where there may not be some obvious connections in their network. So this is like a very specialized kind of sharing, if you will. This one is really interesting in online worlds because we often get ideas coming from totally different places, totally different fields, groups that we belong to that we may not want to tell other people we belong to. I used to study people who blog under pseudonyms, and they blogged about their profession under pseudonyms, and there was a lot of professional sharing that took place on there, as well as your standard storytelling, support and advice and complaints and whatnot. And people didn't always want to confess to being part of this group of people who blog under pseudonyms, but they got a lot of good ideas professionally. And so they would broker these ideas to other groups. And when they broker them, they would kind of pass them through a filter and take out the identifiers of where they got it from. They wouldn't say, I got this from my friend, the blogger, who calls themselves, Dr. Crazy, which actually was a blogger for a while. But they would say, I have a friend at another university, and change that a little bit. But brokering is still a really important thing for us to do. Something I like to encourage highly networked people to consider is whether or not they are effective at brokering all of the great stuff that they're finding between their online worlds and their face-to-face worlds. And in their face-to-face worlds, that includes the people they know who are not so highly networked. Because we all have those colleagues who don't get online very often, or who get online and keep it very narrowly focused onto certain things. And there's an opportunity there that we have to take things that we found online and bring them to that other setting. Negotiation is also really important, and we know that not everything that we find online is going to be great or a great idea. So having this discussion around ideas, not being afraid to point out what works and what doesn't work so well, or what might need to be changed for another environment, that is also a really important network knowledge activity. And then create is like this big ideal. So all of the stuff that we have amassed, we can create new things with it. And we can go back and share those with other people. So if I were to go back to sharing now, it's not just flowing through the things that you've found, but taking whatever you have created and finding a way that you can share it with other people. For us in education, that means perhaps participating in the open educational resource movement. If I've got folks out there who are doing a lot of OER stuff and sharing their work that way, please go ahead and identify yourselves in the chat. I always like to see people who are doing that. I think that's a really important part of the process. So I'm going to transition us from these activities now into thinking about how we can do successful and ethical knowledge networking online. I'm going to run us through a bunch of ideas and then still leave us with a lot of time here that we can engage in some Q&A. So, the first thing is to really get in the mindset. When you're going to get online and be a knowledge networker, you need to be thinking about sharing. You need to be thinking about the ways in which you produce and not the way you're going to just consume. It's also really important to start with the activity and not the tool. Just like as an instructional designer, we'd say it's important to start with the objective and not necessarily the content. Authorship and intellectual property are really important issues to be considered. And even in the world of OER, where you hear people saying things like, oh, it's open, it's an open educational resource, it's free, it doesn't mean that it's devoid of authorship. Whether we are using standard copyright or somebody is engaging in Creative Commons licensing, we need to think about where the ideas originated and providing the appropriate attribution to that. It gets kind of confusing sometimes when we're working in these online environments and we hit the share button so many times that we've lost track of where something came from. It's something to consider when you are authoring and sharing something. If you want people to be giving credit back to you and if you want people to be able to reach you, that's something that always concerns me. It's not necessarily just the credit, but I want somebody to be able to contact me and interact with me. I'm putting this out there not because I want my perspective and my information to rule the world, but because I want people to interact with me around these ideas that I think are important. And if it doesn't have my name on it, then people can't find me. So that one is really important. And if you're doing all of this with students, teaching them about this becomes even more of an issue than standard, if you got it from a book, don't forget to provide a proper citation, because people will say, well, it's online. It was like a meme. It just passed around. Nobody owns it. And you have to dispel some of those rumors for them. Providing feedback. Providing feedback is super important. I think it's really easy for a lot of us to find something, grab something, and walk away. But, when you're the person who shared something, don't you like to know that other people, read it? Liked it? So, give them some stars, give them some thumbs up. Take that extra moment to do that. Reciprocate. When somebody shares, share back whatever you've got. I find a lot of people say that they don't have anything worth sharing. Well, you probably do, or you can work toward it. In fact, one of the things that we're all really capable of doing, even if we don't want to be creating all of this new stuff from scratch ourselves, we're all capable of curating a meaningful collection and sharing that with other people. And that could be our way of reciprocating. I see we have a really great comment in here from Judith about accessibility issues. And, this is unfortunate. In the world of OER, of open educational resources, it is ideal if what we're sharing comes in the form that other people can adapt it and modify that, and which also helps to get at accessibility issues, because if people just put out something that's all packaged, then you can't unpackage it to make little changes or to make it accessible if it wasn't already accessible, or to have a transcript version of it and so on. So there are a lot of issues with what we share and whether or not it's really usable and adaptable for other people. Next, to be mindful of footprints. Everywhere you go, you are leaving a mark. Don't forget about that. Think about your accounts, the names that you sign in under, your identity, whether or not you want to connect different parts of your identity, if you're okay with what we call context collapse. That's the term used for when different parts of your world come together, usually in an online environment. But I like to give everybody the example in the physical world of, if you teach and you you go out for a run and then you run out to the grocery store in your sweaty, stinky running clothes, right? And you invariably run into one of your students there. You're like, oh, this is awkward. This is not teacher me that they're seeing now. It's Saturday morning me. Well, that's an issue of context collapse. And sometimes we like it because we're intentionally brokering and we want to bring together people from our different networks, and other times it's a little bit awkward. And so the footprints that we leave behind online can track us across different contexts and through our accounts. Things that we may do with a smaller group of people because we think that they're funny may not seem so funny to other people, and it's there forevermore. So going forward with those cautions in mind is really important. Respecting privacy concerns is also important. Sharing is such a wonderful thing, but we should always be sure that we have the rights and abilities to share the things that we are sharing. And then again, that we give proper attribution to whoever they belong to. So if we get something, if we're brokering between somebody in our office who doesn't really participate in things online, but they say it's okay to share something, we really want to check with them, well, in what way is it okay for me to share this online? And what kind of attribution do you want? And do you want your name attached to it? Can I share all of this? Should I strip some parts out of it? You think about the awkward things that just happen with email. For example, I had an instance just yesterday where somebody sent me an email after a couple of months, and they replied on top of another email. The thing that they were asking me to do was to actually forward parts of the current message onto a larger group. But I looked down the email trail and I was like, oh, you do not want this whole message going on to people. You don't want me to literally forward this message. You want me to just take this most recent message and send it on to another group. And so I took the time to look at that, to respect that person's privacy concerns. We also really need to respect the ecosystem. This one is super important if you're bringing a class out into this environment. I mean, we've all had that experience before where students have been put forward on an assignment and they come into a group of professionals and they say, I'm writing a paper on this. Does anybody have resources on this topic? And they didn't try to help themselves first. It sounds like they're asking you to do their assignment, and it disrupts the ecosystem. Back in the days of listserv, that's where you would start to see all the messages that would say, who is this person? Stop doing this. And then you would get unsubscribe, unsubscribe, unsubscribe. That's a disruption. We have to think about how we fit in neatly. Or if we think we have some really important things to share, but we're entering a group that we've not previously engaged in, we might want to think about being very careful about our social integration into that group first before we share everything. It can be kind of awkward when we just show up and say, hey, I have the answers to all of your questions. You don't know me, but I can do it all. People don't react well to it. And yet, if you come in more quietly and after getting into that network, you have a lot to share, people will value you highly. So it's all about how you get in there. I encourage people to not overlook the ability to track activity online. If you are creating things and you're putting them out there for other people, whether you're sharing it as a post on LinkedIn or you are tweeting out links to something, there are so many ways of tracking all of this. This can be really useful to bring back for some sort of annual review or report that you might have to show your employer the impact that you're having when you go out and you engage in this kind of knowledge networking. It can also show you the ideas that are more important to others, that are more likely to be shared. The information is there, so it makes sense for us to use it. Having fun with it should also be really important. And when people get online, sometimes they start to feel like it becomes a chore. And I tell them that means that your network got a little too big or you're using too many tools. And then it's time to figure out what's really important to you and scale it back. And I'll give you an example. I use Twitter, but I am not on there all the time. I am one of those situational or event-based Twitter people. I will go to a conference and I will tweet a lot. Or I'll have something to announce to the world, so I will tweet it. But I'm not on there on a daily basis. The reason why I'm not on there posting things on a daily basis is my email overloads. I don't have time for Twitter. I'm too busy dealing with email, and email is about the people who are immediately in front of me in my classes and working on projects with me. So I stepped back from it. When I tried to keep up with Twitter all the time, it felt like a chore. I wasn't having fun with it. I was learning things, but I was trying to save good resources, and it was more of the internet fire hose than I could sip from at that point in time. So I had to shut that down. Sometimes when things get slow, I go back to it and I have fun with it. As soon as it's a chore again, I shrink my network back down a little bit for a while. And then finally, bring it all to your learners. I've tried to present this all very much in a professional development context and thinking about the things that we do when we go out and network with our professional peers and share things that we're doing on the job. But these are skills, these are skills of the workforce now. And these are things that we need to be preparing our learners to do when they go out on the job. So not just bringing all of the information that we're finding online, or I should say not all of it, the good information that we're finding online, the good people resources that we're finding online. Don't just bring those into the instruction that you design and the classrooms that you teach in, but also bring those skills to your students and help them learn how to do the network knowledge activities for themselves. Help them learn how to identify what their needs are and to go after them, because that's going to be really powerful for all of them as they move forward through their careers. So that wraps up what I had today for the presentation portion, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have at this time. And I will tell you that I will, in the next day or so, I will get a copy of these slides put up on my website, which is there at the bottom at vanessadennen.com. It may take me a day or two. We're in the last week of the semester here, and there's a lot of grading and a lot of student defenses happening at the moment. So keeping me very busy. I'm not online networking very much at the moment. Okay, I see a question about social bookmarking and its usefulness. Social bookmarking is really wonderful. Actually, even if you're not doing it all that socially, even if you're not doing it with a group, using social bookmarking tools can be a great way to keep the resources that you're finding organized so that you can come back to them later. And I like it first and foremost for the ability to attach a tag to something that I find. So I can take, whatever I'm grabbing, whatever I see on a website, I grab the URL, and then I've got a tag that's attached to it. I've set up my own tagging system, and it's meaningful to me personally. When I'm doing work on a project with other people, then we will come up with a tagging system that works for us as a group. And we know that whatever we find, we can go back to it easily enough later. I use the tool Digo with some groups of people. I actually have a group who I'm using Slack with right now, and we are grabbing the articles that we find and sharing them to Slack with the descriptions of why we're sharing these particular articles. And when this is a research group, and when we go back to write the papers, what we've been doing is going into Slack and finding all of the articles that we've been saving along the way. I don't know if that answered your question. Slack, S-L-A-C-K is, by the way, what I was talking about using there. And that's really how to describe Slack. It is a communication tool, really, where it's like a messaging tool, but you can also upload documents to it. You can have a calendar running in there. There are a lot of really awesome things that you can be doing in Slack with a group of people. I like to use it with my project groups because we can share all the things that we've been finding online in there easily. We can ask quick questions of each other, and it pops up kind of like a text message would on my phone or whatever device that I'm on. I see that a question about, are there certain places that are better to share, within the groups associated with resources? Holly, can you say more? Can you give me a little bit more context for the question that you're asking there? I would say that.
Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering. I'm a big bookmarker, But then I'm wondering, where would I share different things? I mean, I'm obviously Facebook, but I'm also a big DIY person and learning how to do things in my house or different things through YouTube. But then where would I share, say, my things that I have curated? Or I'm trying to figure out, okay, I'm happy to share, but who's going to be interested in what I'm doing, I guess.
Okay, good. I see where you're coming from now. So I would say it sounds like you are somebody who goes online, and in terms of that online wealth building I was talking about, you're grabbing a lot of information. It sounds like you maybe haven't done a lot to build out an online network of people yet. Do you feel like you belong to groups of people who are sharing resources so that you would want to reciprocate?
Not yet. So that's why this is, I mean, I have Facebook groups that I am involved with, but not outside of. And so to be more intentional, I think this is very helpful with that. I'm just trying to figure out, okay, in what groups, and I saw someone on here said that they are now part of an ID Facebook group that's very helpful. And I was thinking, ooh, which group is that? Because I would be interested in reaching outside of my world, my little world, to a bigger universe.
All right, that's good. So you're on Facebook, and there are some Facebook groups when you can find them, and those are certainly good places to be sharing resources. If you use Twitter, there are chats that are on Twitter. One that immediately comes to mind that there are a lot of instructional designers and learning professionals on is Learn Chat. And they get together once a week on Twitter for a designated period of time when they hold a formal chat around topics. You get everybody tweeting back and forth. Let's see, I'm looking it up right now to see. It says it's on Thursdays from 8:30 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And they use the hashtag. So I see it's been typed there into the chat for you. So if you put the hashtag in front of it and then LRNCHAT, you can actually see the past conversations that they have had on there. And in between the formal chats, people who are regular Learn Chatters will post things that they know will be of interest to the group and use the hashtag LearnChat. So on Twitter, if you start to find the right hashtags to follow, as well as some people of interest to follow, you can often do it by participating in a chat like that. Then you start sharing with those folks on there. Or the Digo social bookmarking tool that I talked about before. There are actually a couple of groups that I belong to on there where I don't know the other people, but they were open groups that you could join, and there are people who bookmark and share items of interest to me for that particular group. It'll vary based on the topic, the group of people. I know there are some groups that are on LinkedIn where people are interacting with each other and sharing resources. Conferences, I find face-to-face conferences can often be a really good way of tapping into new online networks, because you can find out from other people, or if most conferences are doing online things right now, like they will be tweeting during the conference, and if you get on during the conference, actually, even if you're not at the conference, if you get on Twitter and just follow that hashtag during the conference, you'll probably find some people who belong to that organization who are very active online and who will lead you to other groups and other resources and hashtags to follow and a whole bunch of wonderful things. I see we've got a question about strategies to apply network knowledge practices to create and share more open educational resources. Ooh, that's a really important one. And it goes back to thinking of ourselves increasingly as producers as much as we think of ourselves as consumers. We tend to view the internet as this large resource of information and tools that access it. I think that we forget how much we can contribute to that information, and that other people might want to use what we personally have created. And sometimes there are some tricky parts to all of that, because you might create something but you might not be fully allowed to share it because some parts of it may be proprietary to the place that you're working or seem so customized that you don't want to share them out with other people in that way. But and I see that we got this thing in there about librarians being your friends. Absolutely. There are probably librarians who are affiliated with your institution who are working on these very issues, and they can show you some of the places that you can be sharing things. If you're somebody who creates a lot of different things that you would like to share, whether they're collections that you've curated yourself, or if they are for like instructional videos on a particular product, if they're slide decks, I would encourage you to find a place to start to host them online. So if it's a bunch of slide decks that other people might find useful, you could put them on SlideShare. If it's a bunch of videos, you could be hosting them on YouTube. You can then, create your own channels, use tags effectively so that, and keywords, so people can find those materials. And then you might consider whether or not you're going to have a central place like your own website where you officially host these things, so that when you post a new one, if you post it to your website, maybe you have a blog on there so you can introduce each item that you're sharing and write a little bit more about it. And then you can blast it out and share it to other networks. You put it on Twitter and so on. But if the link always ports back to one central location with all of the resources that you've shared, you make it easy for somebody who says like, hey, I really like your video on X, so now I've gone to your website. Oh, look, you have a video on Y, you have a video on Z, you have all of these other great resources. And that promotes more sharing. It also gives other people the idea of, hey, I could do this too. Look at how this person, who's just another person like me, is sharing all the things they've created. I should start to do this. Personally, I find the hardest part of it all, or at least this is my big struggle, is I keep dreaming of that week. Do you know that week when the world stops and nobody else is like doing things or creating extra work for you, so you suddenly have time to go through all of your stuff and just like get it organized and get it shared online the way that you want to share it with everybody else? I find that that's the hardest part of it, because we often do our own projects for our own immediate workplace, and we finish it and we crumple into an exhausted little heap, and we tend to not think of taking it that one step further, which is going out and sharing it with our larger network. Or we save that for only the really big, super special items that we want to, say, take out to a conference and formally share in that location. But this goes back to that idea that I gave before of tracking something, right? So, I know that my employer will think that it's important if I did something and then I took it to a conference and I talked about it, and that act of having it as a conference presentation says that it was important. Although, interestingly enough, sometimes we take it to the conference and 3 people show up in the conference room. I can't be the only person who's had that experience before, right? And so you haven't had a very big reach for it. But if I take something out there and I put it online and then I'm tracking it, I start to learn that, it was 3 people today and 3 more tomorrow, and so on and so on. And over the course of 3 months, there might have been, I would say, at least say 150 people who saw this. And there could be more, because I don't know that people didn't take it and share it in other ways that I'm not able to track. But I can actually take that back to my employer and say, look, I'm sharing things and this is being noticed in the world. So tracking can be an important part of validating those practices and taking that dream week. Yeah, proprietary institutional work or government and military work can be really challenging to try to share that work. Unfortunate but true, and that's where you have to be really good about respecting privacy boundaries when you go online, or perhaps asking, there's this little widget of it here, can I extract this widget and can we take this and share it as OER, because really there's nothing that's trade secret, so to speak, in this little piece here, but other people might find it useful. And it may just be a small thing that you're able to share. It may be let's see, a graphic that shows a particular process. And if you can share those things, it may not even be that somebody else takes it and uses it directly in their own instruction, but you're giving them some different ideas, some inspiration for the way to do things. Oh, I'm so glad that the Orange Grove repository is being shared here, because that is a great place for people to be sharing things across the state of Florida. When we're sharing OERs that are created by faculty, I know some people, and I don't know if this is what you're trying to get at here, Judith, that sometimes faculty members want to be very proprietary with their own work. Like, my value is my thing in my classroom, and I don't want anybody else to take it and try to replace me. I like to go out and say, well, I'm me, and so I'm irreplaceable. You can have all of my instructional materials. You can have my full course shell, but it's never going to be my course because you're not going to still have me in it. And I would think that the same is true of anybody who is teaching a course. So I love to share the things that I have created with other people. It's just a matter of finding the best venues for sharing them and making that an easy process. The other thing is sharing it in a form where it's really useful to other people. Because if I take my slide deck and I put it out there as a PDF, I am locking things down. Now, I want to lock things down when what I am sharing is, for example, my research, because I don't want somebody going out there and changing the numbers in my table and trying to suggest that it was something other than what I put out there. But if I'm trying to share instructional materials, well, if I put my slide deck out as a PDF, then I've made it hard for you to use it as a slide deck. And what if you wanted to insert an extra slide for yourself in there, or customize a home slide, and yet you're still going to give credit to me, hopefully, because that's the way we're supposed to do things. I'm not allowing you to do that. That is something that we need to think about when we are sharing different versions for OERs. And if somebody is really feeling skeptical about that, one option could be to share the more like locked down, pulled together version of something, but to put a note on there that if you would like to use it for your own instructional purposes, if you would like the raw files, please contact me. And then let them contact you. Make it easy for them to do that. And then, you'll know who's using your materials in those other ways. Well, I thank you all for coming and joining me here to talk about this topic today. And, please feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to connect with folks on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And like I said, I will put a copy of my slides up on my website in the next day or two.